Okay then, today we're going to have a look to see what it takes to pass your driving test. We're going to be looking at exactly what the driving examiners are looking for in every single category that they will assess you under. And if you can follow this advice, you can soon join the growing list of people that have passed with Select Driving School. So let's find out how to pass your driving test. Hi everybody, Dan from Select Driving School here. Today we're going to talk about understanding your driving test result and giving you tips to help you pass first time. The DVSA have been working hard to try and become more transparent, especially as they try to clear the backlog. It's in everybody's interest that more people pass first time. So with that in mind, they've published this really useful page on their website, www.gov.uk guidance/understanding your driving test results/car driving test. It explains exactly what the driving test involves. So here we have a quick summary. To pass, you're going to have to commit no more than 15 driving faults. Most people would refer to those as minors. And you're not allowed to commit any serious or dangerous faults, sometimes called majors. As long as you can fulfill that, then you will get one of these shiny pass certificates at the end of your test. At the end of the driving test, the examiner is going to give you a debrief and they're going to explain to you exactly what you did and didn't do correctly. As I say, if you've passed your test, then hopefully that won't take too long and you'll be nice and pleased at the end of it. But if you weren't successful, then try to listen to what they tell you, because it is extremely useful information to help you get it right next time. So here we now see all the various areas where the examiners are going to assess your driving. Now these are all skills and habits that you'll have been practicing with your driving instructor, and also the manoeuvres are there as well. And they're going to be watching you, as I say, in all these categories to try and decide whether or not there's any aspect of your driving that's not up to the standard that they would like to see. We're going to go through each of these one by one. So let's start off with ancillary controls. We're basically here talking about things like your windscreen wipers and your indicators. If you need to use these, you want to use them properly. So examples of faults during your driving test would be not turning on the windscreen wipers when it starts to rain. Remember, you're responsible for safety, so you shouldn't be waiting for your examiner to prompt you to tell you it's raining. You should be using those as soon as you see that your visibility is starting to be reduced. Similarly, the demisters. Make sure that you know how to use them. So it's not just a case of knowing how to use these for your show me tell me's. You need to use them when they're needed. And then very importantly, if you're using any of the controls, you need to still be in control of the car. So you don't need to be looking down at them or fumbling to find them. So those are some examples of the mistakes that you could make. To try and improve it, practice using them whilst you're driving. Even if it's not raining, practice putting the wipers on, etc. And also make sure that you really understand the car you're driving. A lot of people concentrate just on the actual process of driving and don't really pay too much attention to what the car itself has in terms of the ancillaries, which they don't have to use anywhere near as often. Ask your instructor to show you. He may also be able to show you a whole host of other features that the car has that are not necessarily used every day. Things like cruise control, park assist, all kinds of driver aids that are there now. So that's ancillary controls. Hopefully not too many people are going to fail a test under that category, but it's a silly one to fail under if you do. Now, awareness and planning. This is probably where experience really does start to come in, and your awareness and planning is going to improve the more you gain confidence with actually driving the car and performing all the various basic routines that you need to get yourself safely from A to B. So, you know, if you're having to think about your clutch control or which gear to be in or when to brake or what to do with your mirror signals, if you're thinking too much about that, then awareness and planning is usually harder to do. But once those things have become second nature, then working on your awareness and planning and predicting what happens next or what other people could be doing is really going to help. This is also related to your hazard perception. So when you're doing your hazard perception, don't just think of it as a tick box exercise that you've got to do to pass your theory. It's supposed to help you for the real world as well. So Anticipating what other road users might do and potential hazards, and reacting in good time, not at the last minute. I call it the Goldilocks moment. If something happens, what I'm looking for from a pupil is the appropriate reaction. I don't want an underreaction, for example. So if somebody steps out in front, I don't want to see them doing nothing and not slowing down at all, so that I have to take action. But equally, I don't want people to panic and overreact. So, you know, if a car pulls out of us 50 yards ahead, I don't want to see us jumping on the brakes like a scolded cat when simply easing off the gas is more than enough. So try to get your reactions to things to be balanced and appropriate to what's going on. Remember, there's other road users around, not just yourself. They look in particular for you to be careful around the vulnerable road users, and this is going to become more and more to the fore in the next year or so, when the highway code is potentially going to change and really give the vulnerable road users even more priority over the motor vehicles. So example of faults here: not anticipating or showing awareness of the actions of cyclists or other vulnerable road users. So trying to squeeze past cyclists or not allowing for the fact that maybe they're about to move in the road. Not anticipating or showing awareness of other road users. Now, usually this is probably going to be when you want to change lanes or something. You realise you've got to change lanes, or maybe you're following your independent driving on your sat-nav or your signs, and it becomes even more important to you to follow that than to think about where other cars could be. This is always one that, well, makes me put my head in my hands if somebody does it whilst I'm sat in the back of a test, which obviously hasn't been for quite a while during COVID, but people coming up and pulling up behind a queue of parked cars. Please, when you see a queue of cars, make sure that you understand, are they actually parked or are they actually in traffic? You've got to look for the telltale signs. So can you see any exhaust emissions, for example, or are anybody got their brake lights on because they're just holding the car waiting to move off again? Can you see people in the car? You know, those things are probably not going to be the case if the cars are just parked up. And looking out for pedestrians, especially at crossings, but at any point if they're looking at across the road, you need to let them go. So making sure you know the rules of the highway code and following them. Looking well ahead and trying to anticipate what could happen. Keep using those mirrors behind you to see what's going on. Looking out for signs, etc. Looking for the clues. You're trying to become a driving detective. That's why it's an art, and that's why experience helps, because you start to be able to predict better what might happen. So that's awareness and planning, and that covers, as I say, a multitude of sins. Clearance to obstructions. So here we're looking for a good, safe driving position. We don't want to get too close to vehicles when you're passing. We don't want to get too close to cyclists, etc. Generally speaking, we're looking for at least a metre clearance between us and the curb and or any parked cars. But if we can't give that metre, we need to be slowing right down. And if we're not sure, just hold back. As they say, if in doubt, chicken out. You're better off holding back if you're really not too sure if a gap's big enough, rather than trying to squeeze through and the examiner feeling as though you've got too close or taken an unnecessary risk. Control. So this is basically, how do you use the car's controls? Are you a smooth driver? Or are you somebody who is too rough with the controls and makes the car unstable and therefore potentially liable to either stall or struggle up hills if you're not using your gears properly, or if the conditions are not good, maybe you're going to provoke a skid. So common faults here: too much steering. So we're either mounting the pavement or maybe we're doing what we call a swan neck. Holding the clutch down, coasting. Now that reduces your control of the car, and contrary to popular belief, it will also increase your fuel consumption if you're going down a hill. Keeping the car in gear with the clutch up off the gas uses no fuel in modern cars. Holding the clutch down uses fuel, and is basically a lack of control. The wrong gear. So if you change into the wrong gear accidentally, going down, planning to go to third gear, and instead you don't allow the gear stick to jump across the gate, you hit first, the car will slow down awfully and the person behind gets no brake lights, so that causes a major problem. Similarly, holding a higher gear for too long going up a hill and your car starts to struggle, that's also not good control. and being too harsh or not hard enough with the brake. These are all things that the examiner will look out for, and all potentially going to pick you up a serious fault. Controlled stop, the emergency stop. Here we're basically looking for you to stop the car quickly and safely. So most people can stop most modern cars quickly without too much problem, as long as you react in time. So the faults the examiner will look for is you're not prompt enough, you react too slowly when you're asked to stop, and the car travels much further than it really should do. And if you are driving an older car, I mean, it's hard to imagine anybody's going to turn up in test now in a car that is beyond the age of anti-lock brakes, but I suppose it's possible. Braking so hard that you cause the car to skid. But I believe that the biggest failure on the emergency stop is not actually the stop itself, it's when you move away. We'll come to it a bit later on, but moving off safely is something that people fail on immediately having done the emergency stop. They will move off without looking round. After you've done your emergency stop, secure your car, that's handbrake and neutral, take a deep breath, relax. Your examiner will say something along the lines of, "Thank you, I won't ask you to do that again, please drive on when it's safe." And this is the key point, you're in the middle of the road now. Make sure you do a full 360 degree, both blind spots checked before you move off. And if there is somebody approaching, try to work out what they're going to do before you move off. It might be worth giving a right signal to say that you're going to move away, but see if they react to it. Don't start moving if they're going to overtake you. And they will, you've got an L board on. Everybody wants to try and get past learners. The eyesight check. Goes without saying, at the beginning of your test you need to be able to read the number plate. You will be given at least 3 chances to do this. If after 2 you've not been able to do it, they will measure out the distance precisely using a tape measure before they recheck your eyesight. Initially they just sort of estimate roughly how far it is, but make sure your eyesight's up to scratch. That's a very disappointing start to your test and end of your test if you're not able to read it. Following at a safe distance. So this is all about not getting too close to the car in front. So you need to make sure your distance is appropriate for the driving conditions as well. So when we're out of town and we're travelling sort of above 30-40 miles an hour, in dry conditions we would talk about having a 2-second gap, but if it rains we're going to double that to 4 seconds. When you're in town and you're just travelling around at much lower speeds, then we tend to suggest at least 1 metre for every mile an hour. Again, dry conditions. Once you get into the wetter conditions, double that, 2 metres for every mile an hour that you're travelling at. And when you're queuing, tyres and tarmac. Make sure that at all points you can see the tyres and the tarmac of the car in front. So the most common faults really, just driving too close to the vehicle in front, not adjusting your distance when there is bad weather. Rain, ice or fog. It's more likely to be rain because once it gets very wintry or foggy, it's likely that your test wouldn't go ahead anyway. But the conditions could change during the test, I suppose, in some of the worst weather, and adjust what you're doing. Don't carry on if the weather changes during the test. We're getting on to the first manoeuvre, forward bay park, driving into the bay. So here, the most important things we're looking for is, can you control your car properly? But above all, it's observation. Are you aware of what is going on around you at all points during the manoeuvre? Before you park, as you're parking, when you're parked, when you decide to pull out. You'll be asked to drive into a designated space and then reverse out. They will always give you the option to park on the right, and they should always give you the option to park into a space where there are 2 empty bays either side. But if you choose to park next to a parked car, then you need to make sure you can do that safely. So the common faults here are not getting within the lines and not attempting to correct the position. With all the manoeuvres, remember, you will always be given ample opportunity to correct, and it isn't just a one-shot chance. You can have a couple of goes at correcting if you need them, as long as you continue to make sure your observations are all round and effective whilst you're doing that. Do not allow the need to correct to become the be-all and end-all of what you're doing. Observing and reacting is important. So If you do tend to go next to a car, make sure you don't get too close to it, and as I've said, and I'll say again, make sure your observations are effective. So we're not just using our mirrors, we're looking round, and if anybody is approaching, we're reacting appropriately. So if that's another motor vehicle, pause, see what they want to do. Remember, you're the odd one out, and if it's a vulnerable road user, then you shouldn't be travelling towards them at any point whilst they're within your vicinity. Fuel efficient eco driving. Although this does not affect the result of the test, the examiners will mark down how eco your driving is and how fuel efficient it is. So again, comes down to some of the things we've talked earlier about. Anticipation and planning, looking well ahead and not stopping unless you really need to, so trying to roll up to queues or roll up to traffic lights, etc. Always being in the correct gear, not making the engine labour but not letting the car over rev, and not braking too heavily, because all of that is bad for the fuel efficiency of the car and for the general condition of the car. You will save considerably more money by looking after your car at the repair garage than you do in fuel. Judgement, overtaking, meeting, crossing. Again, experience will help this. The more experience you get, the better you'll be able to judge it. We tend to talk about if it's safe to walk across, it should be safe to drive across when you're trying to pull across a road. But you need to make sure that whenever you're doing any of these, your judgment is good. So is it safe to go? Are you leaving enough space? Do you have time to complete the manoeuvres safely? So common faults here, not giving way to other road users who have priority. This potentially could especially happen at crossroads where the rights of priority are not always well understood by everybody around, and potentially you will take the blame even if somebody else is maybe not doing exactly what they should do, but you need to make sure that you are clear yourself. Reacting too late when approaching another vehicle in a meeting situation. Again, look ahead. If in doubt, chicken out, slow down, let them go through, or make sure that they're waiting. Too close to a cyclist when overtaking, obviously this potentially endangers them. And then crossing the path of an oncoming vehicle when turning right. So again, when you're turning right, you need to make sure you've got plenty of time to do it. Okay, so now we move on to junctions, including roundabouts. So again, this is probably going to be the bread and butter of a lot of your lessons, how to deal with various kinds of junctions. And it's something that the examiner is going to see time and time again during your test, so it's really important that you understand how to use your various processes, MSPSL if that's the one you use, or IPSGA as some people will use, to make sure that you're dealing with junctions appropriately. And this is going to be differing sorts of junctions, ones where the view is poor, ones where the view is good, roundabouts, busy ones, mini roundabouts, traffic light control, etc, etc. So they're going to watch to see how you approach, do you come at an appropriate speed, what your observations like, are you looking properly in all directions and making good choices based on what you see. Is your turn right position correct and appropriate for the traffic situation? Similarly with turn left. And do you cut corners? You must not cut corners. This is very important. You will find a lot of very lazy and poor drivers cutting corners, and the examiners will look out specifically for this. And if you're doing it and there's no good reason, then you're almost certainly going to pick up a serious fault. So again, some of the common faults: incorrectly judging the speed of an oncoming vehicle. So sometimes cars will be travelling faster than they should, well above the speed limit. Although they are at fault, it is up to you to understand that they are coming much more quickly than you would normally expect, and not to pull out unless it really is safe to do so. Not checking for other road users when emerging from a slip road onto a dual carriageway. Not something we carry out in Halifax at the moment, but it is something that you should be able to do. Getting yourself too far to the left when turning right onto a minor road, holding up vehicles behind you. So we should be positioning towards the middle of the road, still staying on our side so that we can make a turn, and if the road's wide enough, that should leave space for traffic behind you to pass. However, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Your priority is to turn safely and remain on your side of the road. If the road's not wide enough for people to pass behind you whilst you're waiting, that in itself is not a fault. You shouldn't try and position yourself over the speed. As long as you're up to it, then that will be sufficient. And then approaching too fast. This will be up for your observations deemed effective, may make your exit from the junction far more wild and untidy than it should be. Moving off. So here they're wanting to make sure that you can control the car properly and that you do it safely. And they're going to test this in various ways. They're going to make sure that you can do it from the side of the road, on a hill start, from behind a parked vehicle, so you have to move off at an angle, and at junctions. Examples of fault: trying to move off without the appropriate control and rolling back, not checking your blind spots, a big one. So many people will just have a quick glance in the mirror and then go. That's not good enough. You need to check your blind spot, especially the side to which you're moving off. So if you're going to pull over from the left hand side of the road, which is most common, your final check should be properly over your right shoulder. If you're doing the pulling over on the right exercise, it should be over your left shoulder, and it should be a double check, because you really have to be sure that there's nobody coming before you commit yourself to that. Which brings us on to the next point: trying to move off into the path of an oncoming vehicle. So that could be pulling out when somebody's coming up quickly behind you, or if you're doing an angle emerge, maybe oversteering and pulling out too far to the other side of the road when you should be trying to remain on your side. And repeatedly stalling when moving off throughout your test. If you stall the car, that's not necessarily going to fail it. It's how you deal with it. I have a video called the 4 R's for how to deal with a stall. So the most important thing is you must regain control of the car. Don't let it roll. Reset the controls. Make sure that everything's ready for you to get the car going again. Restart the car, but most importantly, reassess before you move off, so that you know it's actually safe to go. If you continually stall throughout the test, then you may find that although each stall itself is a minor, repeated stalling may tally up, tot up, and eventually be deemed an overall a serious fault. Pedestrian crossing. So here we need to make sure that we're looking out for pedestrians and reacting properly to them. Common faults: stopping on a crossing, not before it, blocking it either in queues or just to give way to pedestrians, moving off before the pedestrian has completely cleared the crossing. Again, this is an example you're going to see from many other experienced drivers where they don't wait for people to get completely across. We have to wait for them to be all the way across the other side, or if it's a crossing with a central reservation, until they've got to the central reservation. Approaching the crossing too fast. Again, this doesn't show good judgement and is very off-putting for the pedestrian. They may be in two minds as to whether you're actually going to stop, which brings us on to the fourth one: not stopping, especially zebra crossings. If you see somebody who's approaching a crossing who you think will get there any time near when you're going to get there, then you should be holding back and waiting for them. Position for normal stops. So again, you're going to be asked to pull over by your examiner several times. And we want to see that you can pull up at the side of the road in an appropriate place. We want it to be safe, legal and convenient. So some of the common faults for this would be partially or completely blocking a driveway, obstruction of a road users, so double parking for example, so that you've created a squeeze for other cars to come through when really you could have positioned yourself more sensibly by moving a bit further on or stopping a bit sooner. Parking with one or more wheels on the pavement, so mounting the pavement and leaving the car like that, or hitting the pavement at too greater force, or parking too far away from the curb. We really should be within about 6 inches no more of the curb when we pull up, but without touching it in the first place. Again, if this is something you're not sure about, practice time and time again with your instructor. Look ahead. Imagine there's a car parked in front of you. Imagine that that's well parked, and imagine trying to pull up and follow that car in its wheels tracks. That sometimes can help people get a position who may have been struggling. So positioning, we want to make sure that when you're driving on the road, you're in the correct position. So are you within the lines of the lane, nice central position if that's appropriate? Are you making sure that you're not too close to pavements or lines, not riding the line? And also, is your lane discipline correct? So do you maintain your position with your within your lane? So again, common faults here: too close to the pavement, putting pedestrians at risk. Pedestrians are vulnerable. We do not want to put them at risk in any way. Remember, your wing mirrors stick out, so if you are riding close to the curb, your wing mirror may actually be over the curb, and a pedestrian stood near there is at risk of being clipped. Getting too close to the centre of the roads, this is the opposite problem. So if you're too close to the centre of the road, then cars coming the other way will be too close to you, and again you've got those overhanging wing mirrors to think about. Driving for too long in the right hand lane of a dual carriageway for no reason. This would also apply to not using your bus lanes. So many people don't use bus lanes. If we go down, best example in Halifax I can give you is Huddersfield Road, going past the Shay, going towards town. There's a bus lane in the left hand side, but it's only a bus lane for 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening. All the rest of the time that lane should be used. Nobody uses it. I don't understand why, whether it's because people are belligerent or they don't understand the signs, but you will find that all the experienced drivers just drive in the right hand lane. You as a learner should understand the rules and should know that you should be going into that left hand lane if you're outside of the times indicated. And then straddling lanes. So this would be where you're maybe vague about which way you're going to go, and instead of picking a lane you start driving round down the middle of it, or overhanging one side or the other. Again, this is going to get in the way of other road users and cause them to have to change direction or speed, which is one of the underlying principles that we should not do. Precautions. This is basically before you set off. Are you going through your cockpit drill? So you're going to check, make sure all the doors are shut, make sure that your seat's in its right position, make sure your steering wheel's in its right position, have you got your seatbelt on, and are all your mirrors correctly adjusted. Now all these things you're likely to have done before the examiner joins you, so they're not particularly expecting you to go through that process, but they are most importantly expecting you to deal with the handbrake and the gear lever. So make sure you haven't left the car in gear when you start it, because the car will jump, and that again will immediately be a fault. And you really should have already dealt with this, but if you do start fiddling about with your seat or mirrors whilst driving, you are going to get a fault for that. If for some reason they're not adjusted properly, then pull over safely and do it there. You may find that you've changed the position of your mirrors for your manoeuvres. Make sure you put them back whilst you're stationary. Progress. So, are we making appropriate progress, and are we avoiding hesitation? A lot of people think that when it's their driving test, they should drive slowly because that's safe. Well, I'm afraid they're wrong. And if anybody gives you that advice, tell them that they're wrong. Yes, we want to be safe and we want to be not driving at excessive speed, but that doesn't mean that we need to be driving around like a snail, because that is annoying and inconvenient for the road users. And the reason why you will find that it becomes a potentially serious fault is because that can cause other road users to make poor decisions. They may try to overtake you, or they may start harassing you, and that is potentially, if you're provoking that because your speed's not appropriate, then you will be held accountable for that. If you're up to the speed limit, as you should be when the road is clear and another road user is bullying you, well, as long as you don't react in an inappropriate way, that's not going to be held against you. That's their bad driving. But if you're provoking it by driving too slowly, driving well below the speed limit on a clear road, then do expect to be getting a fault, possibly a serious fault, for not making appropriate progress. Similarly, at junctions, if it's safe and clear, go. When we're coming up to mini roundabouts with a good view, we should be approaching steadily in second gear, we should be looking early, and if it's clear, we shouldn't be stopping. We shouldn't be driving up to mini roundabouts and stopping, putting the handbrake on, and then looking. That's not making good progress. And again, if somebody else is giving you a clear indication that they're happy for you to carry on, then we shouldn't be waiting for them we should be getting through and getting everybody's day on the go. Response to signs and signals. So we should be looking out for our road signs, traffic lights, anybody who is controlling traffic, such as the police or Lollipop Man, or maybe it's roadworks, and seeing what other road users are doing. And we should be reacting appropriately to them. Again, common faults. Now, I know that a lot of road markings are very poor, especially in Halifax. We have a lot of road markings that are worn, but that's the fault both of the council for not maintaining them properly, but it's also the fault of the road users for driving on them when they shouldn't be. The yellow boxes, for example, they should be pretty much in there because they're not going to be stopped on as often as they are, but they get worn away. Certainly the spaces for cyclists, they should remain pristine really, because there's only the cyclists who should be stopping in them. But when we're coming up to traffic lights, we should assume that there is a space for cyclists. Look out for the clues, look out for remnants of paintwork, and then assume that there is a cycle area there. If you really can't see anything, then by all means move up to the first line, but expect it. When it comes to worn road markings, the way the examiners are going to look at it is if they can see it, why can't you? Make sure that you react properly for speed limit changes. So if the speed limit is going up, don't speed up until you pass it, and if it's coming down, slow down before you reach it. Look out for stop signs. It is compulsory to stop at a stop sign. My advice for people when it comes to stop signs is to concentrate on stopping. Don't try and look early to see if there's a gap, because that's going to encourage you to keep moving. Most junctions, we would encourage you to use the opportunity as you approach steadily to look to see if there's the opportunity to keep going with only just a rolling approach, but on a stop sign that's going to backfire. Just concentrate on getting up to the line and stopping, then look, then go. Similarly, if you stopped at a stop sign in a queue, so maybe you're the third car and you've stopped, that doesn't count. You still have to stop again when you get to the line. As I mentioned earlier, bus lanes. Don't drive in them if you shouldn't, but make sure you do drive in them if they're clear, if you're allowed to. And the vast majority of test times are when the bus lanes are available to you, especially, well, they are in Halifax anyway, and Huddersfield. And again, make sure that you understand the road marking for the lane you're in. If it's a left lane, don't use it to turn right or go ahead, and vice versa. So we're getting to the end of them now, but reverse park, so this is parallel parking. Again, very similar to what I was talking about earlier. For the forward bay park, we're looking for the control of the car, but very importantly, we're looking for observation. So if we don't complete the manoeuvre properly, that will be a fail. So if we're too far back from the car in front, or not near enough to the curb, or we've got the car not parallel to the curb, then that's potentially going to be a fault when you do the parallel parking. Or if you're having to reposition it a lot because you really didn't get the appropriate technique in the first place, that will lead to a serious fault. However, as I've said, you will be given the opportunity to correct, so if you're not happy with your position, do try and correct it. If your examiner really believes you're not going to achieve what they need, they will stop you at some point, but whilst ever they're allowing you to continue, then make sure you're continuing to check what's around you and keep trying to improve the position. And again, not making your observations properly or not ending up within the marked bay. These are all things that are going to go against you. Reverse right, sorry, pulling up on the right hand side of the road. So this is about pulling over safely, getting parallel with the curb, reversing back 2 car lengths and then moving off. So again, the most common faults here: not being aware of a hazard or of a road user when reversing, relying too much on the mirrors. Keep looking around, keep checking your blind spots. Your examiners are really interested in your observations, and if you're just looking in your mirrors, especially if you're just looking in the one on the driver's side to make sure you're staying near the pavement, you're not going to pass. I'm sorry. You shouldn't really be touching or driving onto the pavement. If you make sure that you're parallel and in a good position near the backup, then that shouldn't be a problem. You should just be able to keep the steering straight and concentrate on your observations. And remember, when oncoming traffic is coming towards you, don't be moving. Stop as they pass you, and then when time comes to move away, make sure that there's a good gap front and back. Similarly, when you're pulling over, make sure you have a really big gap to get over there. It's got to be a bigger gap than if you were turning right, because when you pull over, you're actually going to still be in the way of the traffic coming towards you. Signals. We need to make sure that your signals are used properly. Are they correct? Are they well timed? And did you need them? So common faults: signalling when you're not actually going to turn. So this could be either leaving a signal on too long or putting it on too early, so signalling left or right but not turning. Signalling right at a roundabout when you want to go ahead. Listen to the instructions from the examiner. They will almost certainly, when they're giving instructions, tell you whether to signal or not. They will say left first exit, that means they want a left signal on approach. They will say right third exit, that means they want a right signal on approach. But if they say ahead first second exit, whichever it might be, if they say ahead, they're not expecting you to signal as you approach. And again, coming back to timing, those signals don't want to be too late. They want to actually be in time for another road user to actually react to them. Use of mirrors. Are you using your mirrors properly? Are you using them before you make any decision? So whether you're going to signal, whether you're going to change the car's position, whether you're going to change your speed, your examiner will be constantly looking to see how you use your mirrors. And in between times you should be checking them frequently as well. And remember, we use mirrors in pairs, so we tend to check the centre mirror first for proper distance assessment, and then the left or right mirror to make sure that there's space to do what you need to do. Again, common faults here: checking mirrors after the same time as signalling. That isn't really contributing to your decision about your signal, so they need to be done before. Changing lanes without checking your mirrors effectively. Now, this could be on a roundabout, but I find in my experience, certainly in Halifax, it's usually more likely when you're on one of the dual carriageways or just on a road where there's more than one lane. Make sure that you've checked your mirrors before you attempt to move. And then pulling up at the side of the road without signalling to following traffic when appropriate. So again, this is why it's important you check first. Is there somebody behind me? Give a signal to say I'm going to pull in so they don't get taken by surprise. And if you check your mirrors and there's nobody behind you, you don't have to signal. That's where the necessary signal comes in. So that's why the mirror check's important. It will tell you when to signal, whether to signal. Use of speed. Common faults: basically going too fast, going over the speed limit. Generally speaking, examiners will not warn you if you're creeping over the speed limit. I've seen occasions where some examiners will give you a little bit of a nudge if you're just a little bit over, and just point out that you're creeping over, and they have only at that point given you a minor fault. But usually if an examiner points out that your speed is too high, you've already failed. Now, especially remember, again coming back to Halifax, we have an awful lot of 20 zones. That means if you're doing 22, 23 miles an hour, you're already into fault territory. As soon as you hit 24, you're into fail territory. Keep an eye on your speed, not so much so that you're not paying attention to what's going on around you, but you should have a good idea of what your speed is. You should be able to tell just from experience whether it feels fast. A loud car tends to be a faster car. If the car is making more noise, it will be travelling quicker. Try to get yourself into the highest gear possible. It will make it easier to keep the car steady and stop the car from increasing its speed too readily when you apply gas pressure. My recommended gear for 20 mile an hour limits, where it's flat in my car anyway, is third gear. It'll keep the car nicely near 20, but it isn't too frisky. Going up or downhill, usually second gear, because that will control the speed going downhill, and it may struggle going uphill as low as 20 in higher gears. But understand your car. You can experiment with that with your instructor. Also, adjust your speed for the conditions. If it's pouring down with rain and it's a 40 mile an hour limit and conditions are poor, you might be wanting to do 30. etc. And finally, the show me, tell me questions. So with the tell me question, which is a question you get asked at the beginning, you just have to describe, or if you prefer, just sort of go through the motions of showing them what you need to do. It's almost impossible to fail your test or get a serious fault on your tell me question. If you dropped the bonnet on the examiner's head, you'll probably get a serious fault, but so far I've not seen anybody do that. So if you haven't learned your show me, tell me questions properly, and you get that question wrong at the beginning, then don't panic. It will be just a minor fault. There are certainly pages on my website that you can have a look to see what the full answers are, and there's video demonstrations of what the answers are there. But the more important one nowadays is the show me question, where you're asked to operate a control. One of 7 things. You'll be asked to either operate the front or rear demister, wash the front or rear windscreen, switch on the headlights, sound the horn, or put a window down. They're not difficult tasks, and again, as we talked about with ancillary controls, it's just a case of knowing your car, but you must make sure you can do them safely. So when you're asked to do it, don't be in a rush. Make sure it's safe around you, make sure you're not having to deal with a complicated traffic situation ahead, and then just operate the control as you've practiced. If for whatever reason you have a brain freeze, you can't remember how to do it, do not, as we said earlier with ancillary controls right at the beginning, don't be giving that your priority. Driving and safety is your priority, so don't be trying to look for it and taking your eyes off the road. If absolutely necessary, just say, I'm really sorry, I can't remember how to do that. I'm going to pull over at the side of the road somewhere safe, secure the car, handbrake neutral, remind yourself of how to do it, and then when it's safe, move off again. If you do that and you do it correctly, your examiner shouldn't fault you for it. There are more complicated functions to car, again, as I mentioned in the ancillary controls, where you wouldn't necessarily know immediately how to do it. Cars are getting more and more complicated. If I ask somebody how to switch the cruise control on my car, or how to disable the auto stop start, I wouldn't expect them to know how to do it, and I wouldn't expect them to start trying to search the controls of the car to work out how to do it whilst they're trying to drive. I'd expect them to pull over and check first and then use it. Now with the lights and the wipers, that shouldn't really be necessary, but on your test, with less experience on the nerves, the examiners will understand if you need to do that. So please do not start losing control of your car whilst you're trying to find your wipers. So I hope that's useful. I hope it's taken you through everything. You can see there all the categories again. You'll find on my website lots of useful videos which will take you through a lot of these areas just by virtue of looking at how to deal with junctions or observations for manoeuvres, for example, or your show me tell me's. But you'll also find on my YouTube channel a series of compilation videos which show serious mistakes that have occurred on driving tests in my car, and that will also give you some of the same examples but also others, and in particular it will show you for the areas of Halifax where some of the common places are that mistakes occur. I hope you found that useful. If you do, then it'd be appreciated if you leave me a like, and if you subscribe to my YouTube channel. If there's any subjects you'd like me to cover, then please just ask me via YouTube or Facebook or Instagram. Thank you very much.